Clapper board. You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They called it the hush. It wasn't a weapon you could see. It wasn't even a sound. It was the absence of one. When the hush rolled through the Perseus spur, entire constellations went mute. Comms died. Navigation beacons vanished. Quantum entanglement relays choked, their paired partners screaming nothingness from across the void. The stars still burned, but civilization, our thin web of light and code, went dark. The enemy moved inside that darkness. They were called the Ver, not because they named themselves, but because that's what their silence felt like when it touched your brain, like a wire saw against a tree, bite by bite. No language, no broadcast, no peace offerings. Only a perfect vacuum where voices should have been. Colonies died quietly. Stations drifted. The frontier learned what it meant to be alone. Earth's answer did not come as a speech. There was no council hall, no Senate vote broadcast through the nets. Those nets were dead. Earth's answer was a fleet. Hulls like night, running cold, under orders written in ink on paper sealed with wax and blood. Silence doctrine. Admiral Roncade signed every page with the same hand that once held a hospital Roman IV for his sister while she faded under quiet lights. He had learned young that silence was where grief seeded. Now he would teach silence to be where humanity sharpened. Turn it all off. He told them when the fleet gathered beyond Neptune's cold blue crumble of storms. Pretend every star is an ear, and it's listening. He stood on the bridge of the UNS Peregrine, the spine ship, a flat and lean carrier with a wedge nose and a cathedral of armor grown around its heart. In the dim, officers wore their breath as fog. Humans were not made for such cold. They chose it anyway, lightless, radio white, pulse dead. This is not suicide, Cade said without a mic. He said it with his mouth, and those nearest read his lips. Along the bridge, watchers relayed with hands, old-fashioned signals, captured by helmet cams and translated by contact lenses that vibrated messages against tear ducts. There were ways to speak without broadcasting. It will feel like it, he added, and some of them smiled because he was that kind of commander, the kind who cut truth into bite-sized portions. The fleet was 1,000 hulls. Every one of them had names. Peregrine, Stalwart, Hurith, Khyber, Ariadne, Khonsu, Delhi Dawn, Riyadh Star. A small freighter repainted and refitted and renamed after a child's smile, Mina's gift. And a hospital cruiser whose crew had held the hands of miners on Ceres, Mercy's orbit. You could tell this was humanity's fleet because the names were all stories. Admiral Cade walked to the forward pane and looked out at Neptune, at the sun, at the great dark between. He could not hear the hum of the drive. You could never hear anything at all out here. But on ships, there were always noises. Pumps, fans, human conversation. Now there were none. Crew moved like whispers. He pressed his hand against the cold of the transparent armor and thought of a Catholic church in old Seattle where he had once been a boy counting knotholes in a pew. He thought of rain and saw it overlaying the stars. Prayers, maybe, or the shape of discipline. He let his hand fall. On my mark, he mouthed, and the bridge watched him. We enter the hush. The enemy had seeded something in Perseus. Unknown nodes, unknown arrays, things that gripped the quantum foam and strangled it. You could navigate into that darkness blind if you were willing to die. Or you could walk in with the lights off and let the instruments that weren't instruments guide you, the instruments of human grit, memory, instinct, 1,000 years of sailors reading swells. The fleet jumped. They dropped out beside a star with no name humans could agree on. A hard blue-white with two cold companions that bled of heat. The charts called it P8112. The colonists had called it a Shah Hope because the first child born here was named for it. The hush made it a tomb. The system was wrong. He could feel wrong in his teeth. No beacons. No ping from the entanglement relay at L5. No hiss of trash traffic between ore platforms. The hush wasn't a sound, but it echoed in every human mind with the same message. You are alone and your witness is gone. Admiral Cade did not say anything. He nodded. Signals went down the fleet in flashes of light visible only at close range. Laser tight beams leapt between hulls. The old language ran across the dark. Flags in vacuum, except the flags were photons and the poles were airless. Mercy's orbit, the packet said. Mines, hospitals, search. Stalwart. They said, anchor left, gravitics at minimum. Ghost Wing, you know your work. Ghost Wing were the small ones, the fast corvettes and cutters. Human pilots trained from childhood to fly drones through storms and then upgrade to steel. They had practiced for years in arenas, quiet, dark, blindfolded, flying only by the pull of gravity. In the hush, gravity was the last honest word. They fanned out, read the tides. Something heavy lurked past the second cold companion. Something arranged. Every sensor suite danced low, no active pings, no calls, no position reveals. They used star drift, they used parallax. They used the distant heartbeat of HFY itself, how light stretched across their hulls and was swallowed by their curvature. Cade watched and did not breathe. It was minutes 40 when the first for shape became a fact. The cutter Halcyon caught a silhouette sliding across the gas giant. No emissions, no glow, only a deviation in the planet's infrared storms. The silhouette was not much. If you blinked at the image, you lost it. But the pilot did not blink. She was young. Call sign Finch because she loved old birds with yellow chests that sang in the morning. She touched her wrist to the console and told them in a packet sharp as a nail, there. In the footage, the Ver looked like a bruise across the planet's spiraling storms. The brain did not want to see it. The eyes flickered. The mind slipped. It didn't matter. Humans had learned to see the shape of a predator in tall grass 1,000,000 years before they had learned to press steel. The fleet tightened. That was when Mercy's orbit saw the wreck of HFY City 3. A colony cylinder rolls in the dark like a child's lost toy. Lights off. Field generators quiet. Windows, if anything with 5 meters of armor can claim windows, stare back with black eyes. Its spin is wrong. Its living farms have become white. Freezers have failed. Ice shines where green should. They cut in. Quiet. Suits on. Gloves. They moved like surgeons performing on a sleeping god. The first oxygen was bad. You could tell by the way helmets filmed. Then the scrubbers stuttered and reversed, and a breath later the entire visiting team dropped to a knee without knowing why and then laughed because it felt like kneeling in a church at a joke. Because there was nothing to worship here and nothing to laugh about, and still the body remembered how to kneel and how to laugh. Humans are strange. That is why we live. They found children. They found elders. They found a teacher who had sat by a dead terminal and written the names of the missing in chalk on the wall because there was nothing else left that worked. Where are the Ver? Admiral Cade wrote on a slate. He didn't trust a whisper. The teacher drew a shape, not what the Ver looked like. What they did, she drew a circle, then she shaded out the circle's voice. We screamed, she wrote under it. Nothing left our mouths. Back in space, Ghost Wing slid close to the bruise. The bruise became 9 shapes, then 90. Then a lattice of invisible things like spider silk strung between the heavy nodes. The nodes were the hush. Every civilization had kept a secret. The Ver's secret was an understanding of how to convince the vacuum to stop telling truths. The hush clamped down on quantum keys, forced them to unpair, forced the universe to forget what it had entangled. The hush was the eraser. Humanity had tried to build this and failed. That failure had saved our ancestors from becoming tyrants with perfect control. The Ver had succeeded. That success had made them tyrants of a different kind. Admiral, Cade's executive officer, sifted light from a slackline and let it kiss his hand so he could read the braille of it. XOs always had strange rituals. We are within their cathedral. You ever pray? Cade wrote. The XO smiled without teeth and wrote, I do now. The plan was older than Cade. Silence doctrine had been written by people long dead and updated by hands like his that had once held a teenager's fingers while she drifted. It was a plan made by grief and tempered by will. It said, if all voice fails, use light, gravity, and timing. Use weapons like punctuation. Humans in the wet world had learned that a clap could become a word. In the dry world of space, a nuclear blossom had become the same, silent symbols. Cade cut a strip from a Shaz light and sent it to the fleet. Not a message you could decode, not a string of letters. It was rhythm. It was a heartbeat from an old song sung in kitchens. The fleet felt it, not through ears but through how the consoles vibrated and how their ribs remembered dancing at festivals under paper lanterns. On the Halcyon, Finch tightened her harness. She set 2 fingers on the throttle like it was a new friend's wrist. Pilots are not poets, they are poetry, she dove. The Verlatus may have been perfect, but it had an essential flaw. It was an instrument played by something that did not understand noise can be a collaborator and not a crime. The hush punished song. It forgot variation. It despised improvisation. Humans are improvisation with bones. Ghost Wing didn't shoot. They burned. They used the gravity wells of the Vernodes as drums, letting their compact drive skip stored inertia like stones across a lake. Each skip released a whisper of energy in a precise pattern. Those whispers tugged the hush just enough to make it analyze. You could see the hush think if you were trained. You could see the lattice strain a fraction of a fraction. That is all you needed. The peregrine spinal gun, the one a poet had called the needle you use on God's skin when you must cut cancer, spoke without light. It compressed a round of refined tungsten and wrapped it in a hole stolen from the universe's pocket, shoved it through for a breath, then returned it to place at a speed that made fast seem lazy. The tungsten needle arrived inside the first node. It arrived as a surprise. Surprises are the cancers of perfection. The node caved. The hush flinched. Admiral Cade did not wait. His hand cut down like a judge's gavel. The fleet turned the absence of sound into a symphony. Kyber, the frigate with a scar across her nose, threw a Bracewell charge into the shadow of the second node. The charge did nothing where it was planted. It did everything 2 kilometers away, creating a false gravity lip that pulled the node into a slow death spiral. That spiral would have taken minutes, but in wars where voices are gone, minutes are continents. Stalwart sliced the spiral with a rail shot that left no trace but a brief, angry ripple. The node died like a candle smothered under a bowl. Nodes 3, 4, 5 fell to tricks no naval academy had ever dared write on a test. Mining lasers from Mina's gift cut thread that wasn't there. Ariadne unspooled a web of flakes the width of blood cells, and the flakes became mirrors that showed the hush its own reflection. Delhi Dawn faked a distress flare it couldn't possibly have sent and convinced the enemy's predictive algorithms to open a window for rescue. The rescue was a torpedo with a conscience that chose its own second to die. The first for ship revealed itself not by choice, but because it had to. When the lattice faltered, it pushed auxiliary emitters hard. Those emitters glowed not in light, but in how they bent gravity. Ghost Wing felt it in their teeth and rolled. Finch laughed. It was a small laugh. She would not waste oxygen in a suit she might have to wear for days, but it was laughter. Maybe the first one in this system in months. She read the vector and placed her hull in a place the Ver had not expected her to be. The Ver did not expect. That was their doom. Finch's micro-torpedo was not a bomb. It was a pocket of mathematics tuned to a crystal in her palm. She touched the crystal before she fired. Superstition. Humanity keeps its ghosts close. The micro-torpedo kissed the Ver skin and did nothing. Half a breath. Then the crystal in her glove hummed. Then the skin was not. Inside the Ver hull there were chambers where the hush was born. The torpedo didn't destroy them. Destruction is crude. The torpedo asked them a question in a key they didn't know existed. The chambers answered. Their answer broke them. Cade watched without moving. Someone said it in their eyes, "We can win this." It took 96 seconds. From first needle to last echo. 96 seconds, and the hush in Ashab broke like glass dropped from a child's hand. Comms howled, at first in a broken squeal of overlapping, starved signals, as if the void itself was sobbing after holding its breath. Then it settled to the mess that is human speech across 1,000 channels, languages braided, names, numbers, prayers, jokes launched from throats that had forgotten their power. UNS Peregrine to fleet, Cade spoke at last, and speakers in 1,000 rooms delivered his voice like bread. "We do not cheer, we get to work. Humanity excels at work after triumph. It is our finest grace. Mercy's orbit filled with the living. Nurses wore their exhaustion like medals. Engineers mapped salvage routes. Children stared at windows and taught their hands to wave at stars. The teacher who had written names on a wall washed the chalk with tears and wrote food lists instead. There was always food to list. Humans turn horror into chores. That is how we walk away from it. The Ver did not accept insult. They came. Within the hour, the dark beyond the blue-white sun shivered and spat a spear of night. It was not shaped like human ships. There was no nose, no tail, no war paint. It was geometry offended by curves. It moved without heat and without sound, and it was bigger than the Peregrine by a factor that made numbers look small. "Keeps the hush with it," someone said, and they were right. The hush preceded it like winter, so the second battle was harder. It was also the one that would be told to children under blankets with flashlights in their fists. Admiral Cade did not look heroic. Heroes never do when they are busy. He cut the fleet into 3: Anvil, Hammer, Ghost. Anvil took the front, heavy ships with spines like joined fists. Hammer slid behind and above at an angle that would make a mathematician itch. Ghost disappeared. That was the plan. If the plan worked, the Ver would not realize Ghost existed until Ghost made history. The Ver ship saw Anvil. It delighted in an opponent that brought weight to a conversation it believed only weight could win. The hush pressed down. The comms choked, then returned as choked copies of themselves. Filters stuttered. The fleet's computers reached for codes and discovered their keys had been stolen by a distant cousin of reality. Hands, not minds. Cade wrote on a surface with a felt pen. He held the writing up to the camera like a teacher to a class. "Do not trust smart, trust simple." Stalwart's captain turned off 4 layers of automation. Crew moved like fishermen hauling nets. Kyber's gunner sighted not with sensors but by watching how the Ver ship bent starlight. He had grown up in a village where he learned to predict the rain by the way leaves turned. Ariadne's helmswoman drew the course on acetate, then flew her ship along the drawn line. Hammer prepared. It held. The Ver opened its mouth. No light, no flame, a field. 3 of Anvil's ships bloomed into nothing, not fire, a subtraction. The universe misremembered them, and so they ceased. The Ver did not hate them or love them. The Ver simply made them unhappen. Negative emitter, whispered a tech whose father had fixed radios with pliers and patience. "We name it that," she wrote. "Humans name even the things that kill them. Names are the first nails we put in the coffins of fear." Cade nodded once. "Ghost," he signed by tapping metal. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps, a pause, 1. Ghost had been seeded around the field like yeast. Now the yeast would rise. Ghost wing remembered oceans they had never seen. The plan had called their maneuver the undertow. Another plan had called it the impossible. Human plans are often at odds with each other. Human pilots live in the wedge between. Finch's cutter skimmed the edge of the field and let it take her, not fully, a kiss. Enough to steal what she had in plenty, momentum, and then give it back at a new angle. She felt her stomach leave a message at her throat and ignored it. The undertow curved her into a place behind the Ver that had not existed until this moment. There, the Ver had no hush. There, its tail was the mouth of a tunnel that begged for a wish. Finch delivered one. Her payload was not explosive, it was a book. Inside the book were pages written in the ver's mathematics but arranged wrong in a way that appealed to human mischief. You could call it a virus if viruses were loving and wore aprons, rearranging furniture for a house guest's better sleep. The payload arrived and whispered to the ver's field in its own grammar, rest, rest, for 1 second. That was what they had trained for. 1 second is an epoch for a human with a task. Now, Cade said, Peregrine's needle moved again, stalwart through a net of condensed charge. Ariadne did something too clever to explain without a chalkboard and a language designed by impatient angels. Kyber howled and stabbed with flame like an antique. The ver's ship shuddered, the hush cracked, it screamed. It was the first time anyone had heard them make a noise, not a word, a violation. It offended bone and truth. Someone on Mercy's orbit dropped a tray of scalpels. In the sound of them hitting deck, humanity remembered gravity on Earth, the pull of home. Cade hated the scream and loved the tray. The human brain can hold both. The Ver tried to run, but you cannot run from a net sewn ahead of time with thread you do not believe exists. Hammer descended, not as one punch but as a series of taps perfectly timed. That is the trick to breaking stone. Chisel, 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 precisely, then split. The split came. The ship opened like a mouth tried to swallow a star and got a moon instead. The engineers watching from 100 consoles forgot to speak. Finch did not shoot her second payload. She willed herself not to. She conserved. Pilots who live are the ones who know when not to kill. The Ver did not die, but it left. They took their hush and their broken pride and folded in a direction whose name human dictionaries will debate for the next 200 years. They bled as they went. The blood wasn't fluid, it was probability. It stained star catalogs with a new shade of maybe. Silence returned, more honest now, not the hush. The normal quiet that space wears like silk. Cade's XO wrote 3 words on the glass. "We held, sir." Cade nodded. He put his forehead to the glass for the length of one breath. Then he pushed away. He did not call for celebration. He called for inventory. The living, the lost, food, fuel, bits of wreck that had stories in them. Humans make altars from wreck. We are artisans of salvage. Mercy's orbit floated like a white seed in black soil, and around it workers planted discipline. Children were assigned the job of counting screws in buckets, because a child with work is a child who doesn't have to name his nightmares until he is ready. Night, if such a thing exists between stars, fell and rose. The fleet drew a ring around a Shah. Ghost wings slept in shifts, dreamt of the undertow and of birds with yellow chests. Finch woke twice with her hand around the crystal. She did not let it go. She promised the crystal she would wash it someday and did not laugh at herself when she realized she had promised a rock to wash it. Humans are ridiculous. That is a kind of holiness. They stayed 3 days. They mended everything that dared be mended. They put the dead to rest. There were no priests. There were humans. That is enough. On the 4th, they jumped. The hush returned in other systems. It came like winter wind down a mountain with a whistle you could not hear but could feel in chapped skin. The Ver had not learned humility. They did not need to. They only needed to learn fear. The fleet taught them. The War of Silent Stars was not one battle. It was a book of them. Pages turned like orbits. The Peregrine's hull collected scratches that became stories children would trace in museums someday. Cade's hair went white at the temples like frost. The XO drank coffee that tasted of iron and smiled only when no one saw. They found a ring of hush around a pulsar and broke it by pointing the pulsar at its own reflection, using a tank of asteroid water as a mirror. The Var learned that humans will make weapons out of soup if you let them into a kitchen. They discovered an outpost where miners had lined up their drills as if they were muskets and carved in the metal. We waited. The fleet waited with them. When the Ver came, the miners stayed. One of them swung a drill at a Verdrone and grunted like a man in a field hitting a stump. It worked. The drone broke, perhaps out of embarrassment. They stepped into a system whose sun had been forced into fatigue by a net of hush nodes. The sun dimmed. Planets froze. Cade wanted to weep, but weeping is for after. Instead, they threw a hail of charges that returned momentum to the star's heart like massaged muscles. The sun brightened and seemed to sigh. The Ver learned that you can hurt a star and humans will still tuck it in. Every victory had a cost. Survivors counted teeth with tongues. The lists the teacher had once written on a colony wall multiplied and moved into ship's archives. Someone had to keep names. Humanity keeps names with a devotion that borders on madness, and thank God for it. The Ver adjusted. They built deeper hush. They sent scouts shaped like absences. They tried to learn us. You cannot learn a species that loves contradiction and calls it breakfast. Cade held to silence doctrine, and he allowed for divergence. If a captain could break a lattice with a reflective tarp and a song, then the fleet would sing and throw laundry. If Ghost Wing could outthink a field by dancing in its teeth, then the fleet would dance. If Mercy's orbit could heal with a joke, then humor became policy. In the long middle of the war, when fatigue wrapped itself around bones and called itself normal, the fleet received a transmission from far beyond the spur. It reached them through 3 relays that should not have worked and a comet's coma that somehow extended a signal in ways no one understood. The message was text, not because the sender lacked voice, because text endures in ways music and love sometimes can't in machines. It said, "Hold. We see you, we learn, we come." The tag on it was human, it was Earth. You could measure morale as air pressure that hour. It hissed louder, faces lifted. Someone sang a song from a city none of these children had ever seen with their feet on its pavement. Roan Cade sat in a chair that had belonged to another admiral once and closed his eyes. He saw rain. He let himself for 3 breaths. Then he said, "We do not wait for help, we are the help." It became the fleet's shirt logo, printed with greased thumbprints on fabric that would never leave these ships, because supply chains make promises they cannot always keep. Out here, what you wear is what you fight in, and what you fight in is what you sleep in, and what you sleep in is what you will be buried in if you are unlucky. People stitched those words over their hearts. People believed their hands. In the last movement of the war, the Ver made a mistake. They gathered. They made a cathedral of hush so grand it threatened to unmake the spur. At its center hung a device no human could fully parse. It was a knot. It twisted geometry into something that looked like a thorn crown. The hush emanated from it not as a function but as a faith. You could feel belief in the lattice like heat. Mercy's orbit saw the refugees first, ships without drives, people in tin cans waving tablecloths through ports as flags. The fleet stood off and watched the lattice breathe. The lattice watched nothing. It could not conceive of eyes that felt wonder instead of obedience. "Admiral," the XO wrote, and Cade did not look away from the crown. "If that stabilizes, we lose 3 arms." Cade raised his hand and shook it at the wrist as if it hurt. "We cannot amputate ourselves," he wrote back. "What do you call this?" The XO wrote, meaning the thing no one would name for fear of making it a larger fact. Cade's pen hesitated. He wrote, "Heresy." The fleet prepared for the last symphony. Anvil would hold. Hammer would strike. Ghost would perform a miracle. The plan was simple in words and impossible in execution, which is how human plans often live, like dangerous poems. They would let the hush swallow them until it could taste their bones. Then, inside the hush, they would change each other into witnesses. It began with lights, not transmissions, not lasers, lanterns. Mina's gift had them in a closet from a festival a decade old. Paper, wire, lead. The paper burned away in vacuum, but the LEDs survived inside crystal blisters used for hull crack gauges. The fleet taped them to armor and to arms and to the stumps of antennas. The ships glittered like schools of fish. The Ver ignored them. Light without message is decoration. The message was timing. Ariadne tapped a beat across the fleet. Tap, tap, pause, a human heart and a lullaby, and something old from drums on shores that no longer existed. The ships flashed with the beat. The verse lattice analyzed and filed as irrelevant. Human decoration. Noise, ghost wing moved. Finch flew at the crown and did not fire. She did not even breathe for a count that would make a monk faint. She let the hush unwrap her calms, her guidance, her name. She became a thing a hunter would call prey only if the hunter had ever seen a child put on a mask and pretend to be a monster. The ver had never seen children. Inside the crown there were wells, not gravity, meaning. They were pits where definitions fell, where ship and person and place were shoved into a grinder and came out as paste. Finch turned her cutter sideways and dove into meaning. Her crystal sang in her glove for the first time without her touching it. She did not trust the song any more than she trusted a man who suddenly claims he remembers your birthday. But she let it sing. The cutter shivered. The wells tried to make her a paste of definitions. They failed because she kept one definition that mattered and guarded it with all the fierceness she had been born with. I am human. That single definition became a shield no alien could steal. She found the heart. It was small. It always is. It looked like a sphere wrapped with words she could not read. Inside the sphere, light convulsed. The sphere was not matter. It was a contract. It was the ver's promise to themselves. We will be the universe's last editor. Finch took the book payload, the one the fleet had rewritten 1,000 times to say rest to fields and sleep to lenses, and she opened it to a blank page. Then she wrote with her ship's drive. She wrote with heat and inertia. She wrote with the choice she made at age 9 to keep living when a winter fever wanted her to stop. She wrote no. The sphere paused, the hush stumbled, the lattice missed a beat. Tap, pause, the fleet flashed. The lantern spoke. Noise is a collaborator when silence becomes a tyrant. Anvil moved into the throat of the hush and held. Shields bled. Hulls cracked and crews patched with prayer and epoxy. Hammer carved arcs like saber slashes in a painting. Peregrine's needle threaded and cut, until the crown looked like a halo around a broken saint. The verse ship, the big one, the one that had the scream, returned. It did not scream this time. It opened its negative emitter and took 3 ships and a third of a fourth and tried to take the meaning of courage as dessert. Courage refused to be eaten. It reminded the emitter that courage is both a choice and a contagion. The emitter faltered. Ghost, Cade wrote on the glass. He wrote it over and over until it looked like the word for breath in a dead language. Ghost. Finch screamed once into her own throat as a gift to herself. Then she pushed the crystal into the console. It slid into a slot that had not existed last month. Engineers are quick. The crystal spoke without sound. The crown listened without ears. It was a conversation between things that loved and things that commanded. Love does not obey, it cooperates. The crown did not know the difference, it lost. Light returned like a slap and a kiss. The hush died, it did not explode, it exhaled. When a tyrant stops, the world does not shatter. It breathes and the air hurts with how sweet it is. The verse ship stood in a sky that suddenly had rules it could not delete. Every human gun in the spur pointed. The ship, the geometry offended by curves, flickered as if embarrassed. It tried to leave in the direction with the long name. The direction said no. Physics said no. Humanity said no. Peregrine's needle wrote the final period in a sentence that had begun with miners who dared hold drills like muskets. The ship died. It did not scream. It went quiet. Silence fell again. Honest silence. Humans filled it with noise because we are incapable of letting a quiet remain unadorned when celebration is due. The calms sang. Laughter was a new frequency in a spectrum that had once held only pain. On Mercy's orbit, someone juggled scalpel handles and dropped them on purpose because they loved the clatter. Admiral Cade sat down. He let the chair hold him. Chairs are faithful. He closed his eyes, and this time he saw not rain but faces. One of them was his sister. She did not speak, she smiled. He He did not weep. He let his chest unclench instead, and that was better. The fleet did not go home, they went on, because in the places the hush had chewed there were words to rewrite. There were lattices to break and suns to tuck in and children to teach. The war of silent stars had ended in that it had no more battles worth remembering for ballads, but wars like this never end in fact. They become work. Humans excel at work after triumph. We build altars from wreck and kitchens from scrap and schools in the shade of guns. We decided we will never have to fire again but polish anyway because tooth and claw are not sins when they guard bread. The Ver withdrew. They learned a new thing, reluctance. Maybe in their distant cathedrals they began to debate. Maybe they wrote their first word for why. Maybe they did none of this and only licked wounds and plotted. It is not our job to guess. Our job is to plant and to sing and to repair our maps and to remind our children to count screws. Peregrine kept its scratches. Finch kept her crystal on a chain. Ariadne kept equations written in grease pencil on a ceiling panel because sometimes looking up and seeing math is a prayer. Kyber kept a piece of the Ver emitter on a mantle in a mess, a trophy that meant less as a boast and more as a warning. Mercy's orbit kept all of it, because hospitals are museums of resilience. They returned to Esha last. They did it because they promised. They did it because that is what humans do. We circle back to the place where we first learned the shape of a wound so we can show it our new hands. Esha City 3 spun properly now. There were windows that looked out to a sun that had resumed its work with dignity. The teacher had scrubbed the chalk. In its place, there were childish drawings of ships with lanterns. Under each drawing was a name. Under the names was a sentence written in a hand too careful to be a child's. It was the teacher's, and she did not need chalk for this. She had a pen and paper because the hush was gone and the printers worked again. The sentence read, "We heard you." Cade read those words and let his bones feel heavy. He walked the city with his hands behind his back like a stranger who belongs. He stopped at an observation deck where a boy stood with a glance that had too much steel in it for his years. The boy looked at him and then away, and that was enough. Heroes should not be crowded. He returned to the bridge. He touched the glass a final time. It felt less cold. "Set course," he said. His voice carried. He did not need to write it. Not home, forward. The fleet answered with the chatter of 1,000 small acts. Somewhere, a cook flipped bread in a pan and did not burn it for the first time in days. Somewhere, a medic finally slept. Somewhere, Finch fixed a loose strap and then sat and did nothing on purpose for a very long minute. Doing nothing is hard. She did it well. Ghost Wing painted small birds on their hulls, yellow-chested. The painters did not ask permission. Admirals who win do not mind graffiti as long as it keeps the engine singing. Stars slid. Maps repaired themselves under calloused hands. Humanity went on. The hush would come again in other forms. It always does. Markets crash. Winds fail. Diseases write their names across our lungs. Empires insist on devotion. Silence becomes the enemy's first tool each time. We counter it with noise and with work and with a stubborn love for each other's flawed faces. We are a difficult species to edit. We do not obey. We cooperate. We improvise. We endure. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken. END the story.